I want to welcome Leah Bell. She is with Writer C Peace. I know we did a session on driving earlier this year, but it is such an important topic, and we've had some requests to have it again. So Leah, welcome. Thank you for your time. Thanks for being willing to share with us today.
Sure. So before I pull up my PowerPoint, just to give everybody kind of my history and who I am, I'm an occupational therapist. I work for Prisma Health. I have been with this system since 1985. I've been working specifically in the field of driving since 1998, and all of the clients I see come to me based on medical issues from, of course, I see Parkinson's clients, but I see folks who have had strokes or spinal cord injuries. We work with teenagers with disabilities. So anyone we see in our program has some medical related issue. I do see quite a few Parkinson's clients. Of course, there's in Greenville several doctors who specifically treat Parkinson's, and so we get a lot of referrals from those doctors. Some of you may have met us or been through our program or heard about us. At the end, you'll see my name and my contact. So if you don't get your questions answered today or get the information you want, feel free to give me a call or email me. I'll be available. What we're going to do, I've got about 10 slides. It probably will not take the entire time to go through the slides. I want to hit the high points, and then I'd like to leave time for questions, because I feel like that's really when we get the most bang for our buck. Most folks have lots of questions. And I recognize that some of you are caregivers and some of you are folks with a diagnosis of Parkinson's. So I'll try to answer or get you all the information you want. So let us see if I can pull up my PowerPoint. Hang on just a minute. Let's here we go, share. Let's go. Lauren, is everybody seeing my?
Yep, we got you, Leah.
Okay, come on, from begin. Okay. All right. So I just want to say up front that I'm going to hit the high points of this. I am not an expert by any means on anything like medications or, giving you any suggestions on current treatments and those kinds of things. What I'm doing today is addressing how do I work with folks with Parkinson's disease and address the issue of driving safe. Let's not get too bogged down in the weeds and hopefully look at the big picture, and then maybe our questions can help clarify any questions you may have. Okay. So let's start out with just talking about what are some disease facts that I think are important to consider when we're looking at driving. And if you'll hang on just a minute, I'm going to try to move this up there. Nope. All your pictures are hanging out in front of my videos.
But they're not here. We don't see the pictures of us. So I know it blocks your screen.
But I can't read my slide.
Oh, okay.
There we go. I got you. I moved you. Okay. So these are some important facts that kind of impact the clients that I'm seeing. Right now, y'all have probably already heard this or known this in your own research, that there's an estimated, and this is a big gap difference, I think, an estimated between 500,000 and 1 million persons in the United States with Parkinson's disease. And I feel like, and I know this as a personal, from a personal note, that many times the reason that's estimated is because folks don't actually have a diagnosis yet. They are suspected to have symptoms and that look like Parkinson's, but they may not have gotten the definitive diagnosis. That actually happened in my life. My stepfather has Parkinson's, and we went quite a few years with my trying to get my stepfather's primary care doctor to refer him to a neurologist confirm that yes, he did have Parkinson's. The average age of folks when they start to develop symptoms are 60. Now, I did not find the average age of when they're actually diagnosed, but I would say it's probably significantly after that, because the symptoms start out very small and you may not notice it. You may just attribute it to, oh, these are issues related to aging. And then as they become more pervasive or more impactful in your daily life, then you finally get that diagnosis. About 5 to 10% develop the diagnosis before the age of 50. So think like Michael J. Fox or the gentleman that Lauren mentioned earlier. And 50% more prevalent in men than women. Okay, so why is this information important related to driving? Well, the majority of folks that I'm seeing with Parkinson's disease are seniors. Okay, so you're already dealing with issues of normal aging. It is a fact, we all get slower, we all get to the point where our vision changes, we have changes in our processing speed of information. That's just part of the normal aging process. But then comes along Parkinson's disease, and it just exacerbates those deficits, or even adds to some problems we may have already had. So we're addressing changes related to driving because we're aging, but now we're also addressing those changes related to a diagnosis of Parkinson's. Why is it important about men than women? It is the known truth that in most households where there are a male and female, a man and a wife, or a couple, the man tends to be the primary driver in the family. And so women, driving is just important to women, but it definitely has a stronger bias towards a sense of role duties, role responsibilities for men, that they should be the driver, they should be the one to plan the trips and get get the family to where they need to be, or do the things they need to do. So of course, the folks that we're seeing in our program tend to be more men than women. Okay. So again, let's talk about driving and what are the hallmarks of Parkinson's disease that affect driving. And we'll get some more specific behaviors in a little bit. But the first thing is the loss of dopamine. So what does dopamine do? Dopamine is a chemical that is created in the brain or develops out of substantia nigra or the basal ganglia, and that controls voluntary movement. So voluntary movement, think about, okay, I'm making a decision that there's a traffic light ahead and I need to slow down, so I need to move my foot from the gas to the brake. Or oops, somebody pulled out in front of me and I have to consciously think about getting on that brake as quick as I can. Any type of movement, all of our movement of our arms and legs is voluntary, okay? So that dopamine, if we're having changes in that movement, and we'll talk about what those changes are in a little bit, if we have a decrease or a loss of that dopamine, we're not getting the same signals to our muscles to do what they need to do. Another aspect of it is the buildup of Lewy body proteins. And I'm sure many of you may have heard about Lewy body proteins or Lewy body dementia. A Lewy body protein, if there's too much in the brain, can lead to issues of changes in cognition. That includes affecting memory, thinking skills. It can affect movement. And one of the key things that I see with the clients that I treat with Lewy body dementia, or even an increase in those Lewy body proteins, is a change in mood and behavior. So I get quite a few families in that are saying, Dad doesn't act like he used to be. He's, he used to be carefree and now he's more agitated, or he gets more angry or angry easier. And we see that in driving. He gets frustrated with the traffic, those types of things. And then the other is the changes in the production of norepinephrine. So norepinephrine affects our sympathetic nervous system. So you have your sympathetic nervous system, which is something that you cannot consciously control. Okay. And so it controls things like your heart rate, your blood pressure, a movement of food through your digestive tract. So all of those things that we notice we have problems with, like when we're standing and our blood pressure drops or our heart rate goes down too much. And so that's, that can have a big impact on driving. So let's go to the next one. It'll help clarify. Well, I thought so, but let's do this one first. So medications, okay? So this is not a total list of medications that folks are on that have Parkinson's. Excuse me. This is probably I'd say it's the majority of medications, but there may be some that are not on here. But what I want to point out is that these medications that you're placed on or your family member is on can have side effects that exacerbate the exact same problems that you're on the medication for. So, issues that are associated with Parkinson's, the loss or the drop in blood pressure. All right. So we stand up and we get lightheaded and we get dizzy. Well, some of these medications can increase dizziness. They increase our lightheadedness. Actually, sometimes there's a side effect of fainting. Some of the other side effects include blurred vision. There's already vision changes with Parkinson's disease, but if you're on a particular medication, you may have even more increase in your blurred vision. Having increases in involuntary muscle movement. So, you already have a tremor, but some of these medications can increase those tremors. Even down to things like increasing anxiety and hallucinations. So just think about how all those things could affect driving, okay? You want to go out to breakfast with your buddies and you're already having problems with your blood pressure dropping and you're having problems with just mobility and fear of falling because of that drop in blood pressure. It makes us feel weak and fatigued. And now these medications increase that. And, it impacts that whole ability to do all those things you want to do. Now, I am not saying do not take these medications, not at all. What I'm saying is be aware, be cognizant that the medications you take can have impacts on driving abilities. So knowing what the side effects are, knowing what your particular symptoms are related to your Parkinson's disease, and how those side effects or those medications impact your daily routines, not just driving, your entire daily routine. My stepfather every day at 2 o'clock has to go down for a nap. He cannot function from about 2 to 4 because of the changes in the way his medications are when he has his medications. So although he's not driving anymore, there are things that we just don't plan to do between 2 and 4. We don't do doctor's visits at those times. We don't decide to do a house project or those kinds of things. He has to have that time to lay down, take a rest, and revive himself. Okay. So what are the symptoms of Parkinson's disease? And these are I would say the biggest ones that are going to affect driving and affect your daily routines. Many of them you might have noticed. I hear most Parkinson's folks coming in and saying the way that they noticed their disease or something first was a change in their motor abilities, maybe a little tremor, or that they just felt tight and stiff. So the motor changes can be multiple. All right. There's rigidity or stiffness, that inability to have smooth, fluid movement of your muscles. There are tremors. Tremors can impact, think about holding onto a steering wheel. And if you have tremors and your hands are moving and your arms are shaking a lot, you're going to get a lot of play in that steering wheel. You're going to get a lot of movement. So that ability to maintain your ability to stay in the center of the lane and stay where you need to be is going to be much tougher. You're going to work a lot harder to hold that steering wheel steady. Or even think about your foot. And, sometimes we see pumping of the gas and brake, all right, or pumping of that foot and that ankle, and that impacts that ability to hold that gas pedal or that brake pedal steady. Dystonic posturing. So dystonic posturing just means like a change in our way our body is holding itself, holding that muscle. You see it a lot in the neck. We get a lot of downward, our eyes are cast downward, our neck is bent, and so it's harder for us to look up and look forward. You might see it, you might feel it in your hands and in your toes. They might be tight and they tend to bind up a little bit. So again, if you're having those kinds of things, it's going to be much harder for you to control that voluntary movement to be able to use the gas and brake, the steering wheel, or hit the turn signal, or even apply, like doing the small dials for your radio or those kinds of things. And then bradykinesia, so it's just a fancy term for slow movement, so that your brain says foot move, or your brain says arms turn the steering wheel to the right. But what happens is that motor input from the brain to that muscle, all right, is slow. So it affects the output. The output of that movement is slow. So if we're in an emergency situation, say you're going to breakfast with your buddies, and it is, 7 o'clock in the morning, and all the kids who have cars, they got cars for Christmas, and they're out driving and they're not paying attention, and they pull out in front of you and you need to slam on the brake. Well, then you're in trouble if you have that issue of bradykinesia, because you're not going to get that emergency response or that quick response that we want to have. So those are some of the motor changes. Then we look at vision changes. Vision changes is one of the things that folks with, that I hear pretty common with Parkinson's clients. They did not realize that was going to be a part of the Parkinson's. So we have muscles that move our eyes, just like we have muscles that move our arms and legs. And those muscles can be affected just like your arms and legs. So the ability to scan, to search, to look one way or another, to move your eyes can be affected. You have an increase in complaints of dry eyes. Double vision. Double vision comes from the two eyes not working together smoothly. All right, both our eyes should be pointed at the same target at the same time. But if we have an imbalance in those muscles and one eye is not moving as easily, then the two eyes don't look at that object at the same time. So that's what increases our double vision. Double vision is not always you see two separate objects. You may have an overlay. You may have it look like one's behind the other, or they're slightly shadowing. It may be higher and lower. Double vision can be multiple in multiple positions, but it's difficult. So if you have double vision and you're trying to figure out, where is that car that's coming towards me? How close is it? And you're not recognizing which one of those visions is actually the car, then you're going to potentially have a change in how you shift in your lane to allow a car passing. So that's an example. Along with that double vision and that blurred vision, we have an increased difficulty reading. It's harder to see when our eyes are dry and blurry. So it's harder to read. So that's going to impact our ability to see that odometer and read the information on your instrument panel. It's going to affect your ability to do things like look at your GPS if you use a GPS to navigate. So it's going to be more difficult. And one of the biggest areas of vision changes is contrast sensitivity. So contrast sensitivity is what allows us to be able to recognize information with decreased contrast. Okay, so an example would be driving at dusk. All right, and so when we drive at dusk and the light's not as bright and we can't see as well, that's just normal because it's not as bright. The car coming towards you is light gray. All right, it tends to fade out in the background information when we don't have good contrast. Contrast sensitivity can, or difficulties with contrast sensitivity can develop from many problems, not just Parkinson's disease. So you have other eye diseases that could affect that. You think about glaucoma or cataracts, those types of things. So you'll have those changes also. So cognitive changes. The thing about Parkinson's disease, when I'm reading all of these things, not everybody has all of these issues. Some folks may only have motor changes. That is the primary issue that folks notice with their Parkinson's, but cognitive changes can also affect folks. So the ability to concentrate, to stay focused on a task. When we drive, it requires the most amount of attention and concentration that we have. So think about driving Christmas time down Woodruff Road. For those of you who are aware of Woodruff Road, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of Christmas lights, a lot of traffic, a lot of things that are distracting. And so if we have problems with that attention and being able to pay attention to all the information out there, it increases our risk while we're driving. So that's a big issue for Parkinson's and the cognitive changes. We see changes in memory. So memory can affect our ability to recognize routes, familiar routes that we've been on, or be able to navigate to a new place. Also, just being able to keep up with the traffic pattern that's around us. So, you're driving down 85 and you need to make a lane change, and you have to remember, oh, that 18-wheeler's over here on my right. I need to remember to check my mirrors and to look to make sure I'm not pulling out in front of that 18-wheeler. If our memory is not always cueing us to help us, that working memory, then it can put us into a pickle. Executive functions, really that's a term for just putting it all together. The brain's ability to take all the information that's coming in and make sense of it to make informed decision and make a safe decision. Visuospatial impairment has to do with recognizing that the world is three-dimensional. It helps us do things when we're driving, like make lane changes or pull into our garage without knocking the mirrors off the car. And along with Parkinson's disease, can have a change in our visuospatial ability. So that ability to go, okay, that object is closer to me or further away than I think it is, or being able to just kind of identify the size of your car in relation to the traffic around it. If someone has to get a new car and the car that you buy, you decide to get a bigger car, and the last one you had was a small Prius, you've got to be able to quickly adjust for the changes in the size of your car to the environment around you. So that's another issue that we see related to Parkinson's disease. And then, of course, as I touched base on before, the level of alertness. Excessive fatigue and unpredictable fatigue comes along with Parkinson's. So, you know, you go out and again, it's Christmas time, you're going to shop with your family and be able to go out and get all your Christmas presents for your grandchildren or your family. And that's very fatiguing for the normal person. Okay, not normal, but for as we are normally aging. But then we have Parkinson's and it just becomes a lot. And we go to get in our car and we have a long way to drive home. Say you're 40 minutes. I live 40 minutes from downtown Greenville, so it takes a long time to get there. So if I'm tired and I've done all that shopping, I'm not going to be as attentive when I get in the car. I'm not going to have the motor reflexes that I need when I'm driving after that long day. So it's a big thing to check off and to be aware of. And then the other thing that you're all aware of is the changes of your level of alertness related to your medications. We talk about on and off times. You know, you may take a medication at 8 in the morning, and typically by noontime, you start seeing the downslope on that medication, knowing that you have to take the second round of it, say at 1 o'clock. So if you're out driving, again, I'll use the Christmas time shopping as an example. You probably would not want to be out driving at noon, all right? Because you know that your medications aren't going to be as effective at that point in time. So that affects, again, our level of alertness. Okay, so I just thought I would put in here some what we call red flags and issues to be concerned about, or things that you may notice in yourself or you may hear family members talking about, or you as a family member may have concerns about with your loved ones. So these are some biggies related to Parkinson's disease that tend to be red flags that indicate, you know, there are some concerns for safety for driving. The first one I have here is your speed is slower than the rest of traffic. Well, I am a big proponent of not speeding. I think we should stick to our speed limits, but being able to say that you're slower than the rest of traffic is not necessarily safe. What happens when we're slower than everybody else is that the folks around you are gonna whip around you and be more aggressive. And if we are having folks try to get around us and cutting us off, it increases our anxiety, but we also remember we don't have good reaction time, or we're not as fast as we once were. So it's going to impact you and the others around you. Trouble switching lanes or changing lanes. So we kind of talked about that. Those issues with spatial skills are just being able to make a quick decision to look in my mirrors and go, yes, I can move now. I need to do it now. Then we have stopping or slowing down for no clear reason. Okay. So where I see this quite a bit with my Parkinson's clients tends to be at intersections. Okay. So having difficulty reading an intersection that you're coming to and knowing whether or not that cross traffic is safe, and if you're going to be able to proceed through that intersection. So that's a big area. Drifting in the lane, being able to stay in the middle of your lane. I know we have a lane that's much larger than our car, but in general, we should try to keep our car right in the middle. We shouldn't be driving heavily on the left or heavily on the right. We should try to stay right in the middle. And so what happens with that drifting in the lane, it can be related to multiple things. It can be, I mentioned earlier about the trimmers on the steering wheel. So if we're moving our steering wheel a lot, our car is going to be going back and forth in the lane. If we have a vision problem, we have double vision and we can't figure out where we are in that lane, you're going to be moving that car a good bit in that lane to figure out where is middle. Forgetting safety issues. The big thing is turn signals. we have to be very vigilant on our communication with other drivers. And some of the only ways that we have to communicate with other drivers as to what we're doing, one is use of turn signals. Okay. So those folks around you are not going to know that you need to turn right or turn left unless you use that turn signal. And when we're forgetting to do that, it's going to impact other folks around you and being aware of what you need to be doing. Lost in familiar areas. I touched base on this, having difficulty routing to familiar areas. You know, maybe it's somewhere that someone has been many, many times for 20 years, has driven this route to go to a monthly meeting. And then all of a sudden it's hard to get there. It's hard to remember where was that meeting? How did I get there? What roads did I take? Another could be unexplained dings on the car. Okay, so there's possibilities, you know, that could be related to the person driving the car or the person getting a ding in the car because they made a wrong decision or they had a problem with things like getting too close to the garbage cans on the side of the road. Any of those kinds of things, and not being able to explain it later to themselves or to the family. So that's a biggie. Fender benders, and so from somebody, for instance, who's been an excellent driver all their lives and never had any accidents, and all of a sudden they're having fender benders or lots of near misses, that's a big safety issue. So that's something that's a big red flag. And then, of course, their family concerns. And I would say I see this the most, that I have clients come into my office, and in all honesty, I've been doing this many years and I've never had anybody come in and say, I'm a bad driver. Never has anybody told me I'm a bad driver. My clients usually say, I'm a good driver, I'm a safe driver. However, what's happening now is family is noticing more things, or friends or caregivers or people in the community are having increased concerns about the persons with Parkinson's driving. And sometimes I think we just have to take that leap of faith and know that our family loves us and they're not out to have anything against us, but they're expressing those concerns because it is a valid concern. And we have to trust, okay, that these folks and their concerns, there has to be some validity to it. So let's figure this out. So, you know, if you're seeing these things or your family's expressing these things, what can you do about it? How are you going to get it checked out? How are you going to decide that you're safe? Well, I would say the first thing to do is you got to talk to your physician. If you don't tell your physician that you're having these problems, they're not going to know. Your physician cannot read your mind. They don't know. So you got to have those discussions. It's really important. But the other thing that you can do in discussing with your physician is you can have an evaluation. Okay. And so let me kind of talk about those. So that's what I do. I am, as I said, I'm an occupational therapist, but I'm a certified driver rehabilitation specialist. And we do evaluations on folks to determine where they are in this process and how we remain safe for driving. The big thing to know with Parkinson's disease, and this is kind of a thing that folks don't like to hear from me, but once we have that diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, it's not a question of if you will have to stop driving. It is a question of when. Parkinson's is a progressive disease, okay? And so you're going to have an increase, or you know, as those symptoms continue to be exhibited or noted, they're not going to be able to be remediated. They may be able to held stable for a while with medications, but there does come a time when we have to stop driving. But prior to getting to that, let's do an evaluation. Let's figure out where you are. So What do I evaluate with these during these evaluations? So this is exactly what I've just been talking about. So the first thing is I'm going to check vision and visual perception. Is your vision, where it needs to be for driving? We need to have good visual acuity to see what's going on out there. So I'm going to assess that. I'm going to do some testing on thinking skills. How is your mind working? How is your memory working? Are you able to multitask? Are you able to demonstrate good concentration and good attention? We're going to look at range of motion and physical reaction time. So are your arms and legs working well? What's your movement? Is it nice and fluid? Do you have tremors? Do you not have tremors? How quickly can you respond on a break in an emergency situation? What is your strength? Are you able to manage the resistance for the steering wheel? Are you able to get in and out of your car easily? All right. It's hard getting in and out of a car. And the more stiff we are, the more we have impaired mobility, it's going to make it more difficult getting in and out. Even doing things like turning our head and checking our mirrors, those kinds of things. We're going to look at functional mobility. So functional mobility is, are you walking still? Do you use a walker? Do you use a cane? Are you in a wheelchair? None of those things should preclude driving, but we have to figure out, okay, if I have to use this mobility device, then how do I carry it with me? All right, how am I going to get it into the car? How do I get it out of the car? How's my balance being able to unload that walker by myself? Those kinds of things. And then we look at driving history and driving needs. I would say the majority of folks that come into my office who are seniors have already modified their driving, have already changed their driving. They're not taking those long trips anymore, but you need to go to the grocery store. You need to get your hair done. You need to take your dog to the vet, those kinds of things. So we need to be able to drive locally. So I'm going to check that out. What do you need to be able to do? What's important? Where do you need to go for driving? And are there areas that you have to drive to, or can we look at, you have friends to pick you up to go to the coffee meeting, or are you to church, that kind of thing, but you have to be able to go to your doctor's appointment, those things. So we want to make sure that we're addressing what are your needs and what's important on those for those driving destinations. So that's really the first part of the assessment. It is a two-part assessment. So that happens in my office. If everything goes okay on that assessment, then we'll actually do a driving test. Now that driving test happens in my car because by law I have to have a brake on my side. But when we get out and drive, I'm looking to see, how do you do? I don't have any expectations that folks should be Mario Andretti or super drivers. I expect that, however, you should be safe when you're driving. So we generally start out in a neighborhood. It lets folks get used to my car and kind of just the feel of that car, but it lets the patient, my client, get comfortable in the car, and it lets me get comfortable with the client, making sure that they have good, safe abilities while they're in that restricted environment. If they do fine, we just keep increasing the difficulty of that drive. It includes some, trafficked areas. Some of it's heavy, some of it's not heavy. Again, I'm going to modify it to depend on what your driving needs are or where you live. If I work with someone, for instance, that lives in rural upstate South Carolina, Walhalla or Westminster, and they never drive anywhere other than that, I would not take them on a driving evaluation on Woodruff Road in Greenville. Okay, so we may do a more rural route. But we're looking, are you safe? Is that person safe on the road? Okay. So what could the outcomes be from this assessment? So I personally would love to be able to see everyone the minute that they're diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. That way we can establish that this is a baseline. Let's look at how you're doing now. And most of those folks would turn out with a recommendation. Right now, they look safe. You look good to continue driving. Let's keep going. This baseline now has been established and it gives us something to compare to. So based on that, then I would recommend regular reevaluations. Probably for most folks, I would start out saying, let's just check you out yearly. Let's just make sure things are okay. As the disease progresses, we may say, let's move it to every 6 months. But we're keeping up with that progression and making sure that, that safety is still there. Then we have another possible outcome could be that there are some concerns. Is say, for instance, in certain areas, the driving, heavy traffic may be more difficult, more distracting. And so we would say, okay, don't drive on Woodruff Road. You need to stick in your local community within a couple of miles of your home, that kind of thing. We may say, don't go out at high traffic times of the day. That would be another way to modify driving. We can also say, okay, let's pick the destinations that you want to go to, and those would be the only places. So you're going to drive to church, you're going to drive to the beauty parlor, you're going to drive to your breakfast plans, or you have a meeting that you have once a month with the church, that kind of thing. And it's at this time that we really need to start planning for alternative transportation. So start thinking about, okay, if I can't go to the places that I want to go, all right, now that I'm having to change my driving, how am I going to plan for when I get to the point I cannot drive any longer? Who's going to take me? How am I going to get there? We live in a time where there's Uber and all kinds of other transportation services, but financially that may be prohibitive for some. So who in the family can help us out? What kind of friends do we have? Do we have somebody at church that can pick us up every time to take us to church? And start developing a plan. Write it down. I always say, if you put it in writing, we're more likely to actually follow through with that. And the earlier you do that and you have control of that plan, then you have control of your transportation. And then we get, of course, to the last option, which there does come a time when we have to say, you're no longer safe for driving. It is unsafe. It's time to retire. And in that situation, we do report to the Department of Motor Vehicles that someone has reached the point they should not be driving. But we don't let folks leave our office without talking about what is that plan? What is that? How are we going to get where we need to go? Let's talk about it, and let's talk about how we're going to implement it right away. So in all of my evaluations, I have family or caregiver come with my client to the entire evaluation. That way we can go ahead and talk about how is family going to help, who's going to be responsible for what, and how are we going to make sure mom or dad or our loved one gets to where they need to go. Being at home all the time and being isolated doesn't help anybody. It's going to make it worse for family and for the person with Parkinson's. So we don't want that to happen. So being able to have that transportation plan is vital to be as independent as possible. Okay. All right. Okay, so we are really at the point for questions. Lauren, you want to open it up or share some questions?
Yes, well, thank you. Very thorough. And I think that particularly things like the red flags, like what to look for. And I think that all of us, we all have our blind spots anyway, like what we think we're doing. And I think those red flags were helpful to give some specific things to maybe notice that maybe otherwise we wouldn't. So I think that was really helpful, but I know that all of you are muted. You can unmute by touching your space bar or use the mute button. Does anybody have any questions for Leah or comments?
Yes, I have a comment.
Okay.
Yes, Ron.
I have a couple of them actually. I find out that it's easier to drive, maintain the lane and everything if I am within or slightly above the speed limit. If I want to drive under the speed limit, I found it boring and difficult to keep my attention on it.
Well, that's interesting.
That is interesting. Okay, I'm not saying I disagree with you. What I would say is above the speed limit is illegal. So in the state of South Carolina, we are a state that even though the speed limit, people like to think that they have 5 or 10 miles over the speed limit. That's
It's my
not
10%.
actually, pardon?
It's my 10%.
It's your 10%. Well, I hear what you're saying, and I know a lot of people drive 10% or much higher, but it is illegal in South Carolina. If the speed limit is 50, anything over 50 is considered illegal.
Yes, I know. I'm not a Tiger Woods. And the second comment I have, and this one is to relax a bit the atmosphere, is that might be a lot of people with Parkinson in South Carolina because nobody uses the signal to turn left or turn right. That's my.
I will say we are a state that tends to be slack with turn signals. I would agree.
Yeah.
Well, as always, Rod, thank you for always making it real for all of us. I appreciate
Yes.
your humor.
Well, we have to live.
Yes.
That's right. Any other comments or questions from anybody else? Yes, John.
Do you ever do any work helping drivers remediate the problems that they are having? In other words, to become better drivers, even though they have Parkinson's. Instead of saying, well, let's start preparing for you to stop driving, let's see how we can prolong your time behind the wheel by doing these things. That these need to be smart habits to form now, or things that you can do. Even to the point of like if it comes to mobility, basic mobility, we exercise, we do other things so we can walk, we can get up safely, we reduce our risk for fall, we don't stop moving. Can we do those things with driving as well?
Absolutely. So, however, that tends to come earlier in the process than later. Okay, so if we see somebody and we feel like it is something that can be remediated, an example would be reduced flexibility. Okay, so reduced ability to kind of turn and look over our shoulders. We may recommend specific exercises. We may recommend therapy, go to physical therapy, work on this for a little bit. So absolutely, if there are things that can be remediated or worked on, we are going to suggest that. However, the further that we get along in that process, when we're in the later stages of the disease, many of those things cannot be remediated. But part of the thing is we all have bad habits, right? I mean, even I'm not a great, a perfect driver, and I have bad habits as well. And so we have to be willing to eliminate the bad habits also. Sometimes bad habits are exacerbated by our Parkinson's.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think that is a great point. And John, just your question and certainly your answer, Leah, just if you can improve the things that you're doing poorly anyway,
Right.
in spite
Right.
of your Parkinson's,
Right.
you're already going to be a better driver than some of those people not using their turn signals anyway, Rod.
Exactly.
Anybody else? Any other thoughts before we wrap up today?
Hey, so Leah, can you speak to listening to your doctor's recommendations, or I guess just maybe recognizing that if your doctor hasn't mentioned that you shouldn't drive, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are safe? Could you kind of discuss that a little bit?
Well, it has been my experience that most doctors tend to avoid the discussion. Okay. And there are multiple reasons for that, and I certainly understand. One of the things is the doctor needs to maintain a fairly good working relationship with the client so that he can provide or she can provide the best care. When that relationship becomes contentious, all right, and driving is a contentious topic. I mean, we all know it. So they tend to avoid that discussion. So I always tell our clients, you bring it up first. You be proactive in managing your health. You be proactive in getting that information. And then, you know, talk about to the doctor, okay, how can I maintain my safety? What kind of medications can you give to me that have the least side effects, but manage my Parkinson's symptoms? What recommendations do you have? And then asking for a referral if you need to for our program so that we can give the recommendation back to the physician. In all honesty, there's not a physician in the world that would spend the amount of time we do in our evaluation. Okay, usually you're in there 15 minutes and out, 20 minutes maybe. But when I do an evaluation, I would say the least amount of time I'm actually with a client is 90 minutes. I have assessed a wide variety of things and I am looking at the big picture. So sometimes the physician, because they're so pushed for time, may not have the big picture. So getting a referral will help give he or she that information. But you know, back to the root of your question, speaking to should we follow our physician's recommendation? Absolutely. And so if you disagree with a recommendation, whether it's driving or anything else, you have a role in this relationship and sitting down and having that discussion and talk about what are all the potential concerns. Now, what I would say is if you have a lot of things to talk about with your physician, and this is one of them, and you know it's going to take some time, when you make that appointment, ask for an extended appointment. Okay, that when they schedule you, when the nurse or the scheduler calls to, you know, schedule your appointment, they're going to flip you into a 15-minute appointment. You need to say, I need extra time. And they can give you that time, but you have to ask for it to be scheduled. They're not just going to give you unlimited time without you letting them know that ahead of time.
And I think that speaks to something we hear almost every session, regardless of what the topic is to be your own advocate, make sure that you are making sure that you are as educated as possible and ask the right questions. So,
yes.
John, is your hand up again?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So I guess this always comes up, you know, about the money thing about for anyone. I like most people, I think, have the most regard and respect for people's lives when I'm on the road. You know, I think about life as being precious, you know, and so I don't want anyone to get hurt, including myself and my family. But you come up with those problems that, like, I'm sure, how much does it cost to be evaluated, like through your organization? And also, do you report to any insurance agencies, or when do insurance agencies get involved in you know, the cost of the risk involved in having a person with Parkinson's driving? And also, do insurance agencies or police departments or your doctor, how do they all weigh in terms of revoking your driving privileges?
Okay, so let me start with the cost of the program. So our evaluation, as I said, is in two parts. So the first half in the office is billed to your insurance under your occupational therapy benefit. So that's covered. The road portion, unfortunately, insurance does not cover that. They consider driving a luxury. Don't quite understand that, you know, but anyway, they do not cover that. So the charge for the road test is $120 an hour. An average road test takes about an hour and a half. So when I talked about the doctor is not out there with you or not with you for a long period of time, I'm actually in the car with somebody for an hour and a half driving all over, and I'm really getting you can be promised that you're getting a good assessment of your driving abilities in that assessment.
Wow.
Now, the insurance question, your insurance company is not going to know anything about your Parkinson's disease unless you call them and tell them, okay? Or unless you've been in an accident, okay? And they're still not going to know that you have, because you're talking about your automobile insurance, okay? So unless you're in an accident that it's on a report somewhere from a physician that you have Parkinson's, or it's on a report, you know, that the police wrote that you had Parkinson's, and I'm not sure why they would, your automobile insurance is not going to know anything about your Parkinson's disease, okay? Now, as far as South Carolina does not have mandatory reporting for Parkinson's disease. Some states do, but South Carolina does not. What happens with the DMV is they do not know anything also about your Parkinson's disease until someone reports you. And that would be voluntary reporting by your physician. As I said, in our program, if we determine someone is unsafe to drive, we do report to the Department of Motor Vehicles. However, the DMV requires a report from the physician to do a revocation of a license. So even though we are providing that recommendation that someone is not safe to drive, the DMV requires that the neurologist weigh in on it. All right, and then that information goes to what we call a medical review board. And with in South Carolina, it's called driver improvement. They're the part of the DMV that handles medical cases. And so that medical board is made up of physicians in all types of practice. And they get a copy of your information and the forms that have been had to fill out for the DMV, and they make a determination on whether or not someone is safe to continue driving based on that information. So that form would have to be completed by your neurologist. So does that answer
Yes.
all those questions, I think?
Yes, very, very good. Thank you.
I think it's very helpful, and certainly, you know, the acknowledgement if it's your automobile insurance, not your health
Right.
insurance. I think we often just go to medical insurance. So,
Right.
well, thank you again, Leah, for your time. Thank you, everybody,
Sure.
for your participation. This will be recorded. We'll let you know when it's available on the website. It's always on the bottom of the first page as soon as we can get it up there. If you want to share this with other people or review it. And as always, if you have ideas for programs, things you'd like to have more information about, we're always looking for things that that will benefit you where you are. So let us know if there's someone that you'd like to bring in as a speaker. We're setting schedules for 2022. So, all right, with that,